Slaying Sunnah, Abu Ishaq al-Shāṭibī's Concept of Bida in al-Iʻtiṣām, McGill University, 1999, A.S. Jahar. Chapter 1, Sufis versus Jurists. Sufism has been consistently criticized by classical and medieval jurists alike, among them Shafi'i, who died in 204, commensurate with 820, Ahmed ibn Hanbal died 241, 855. The former denounced the extreme Sufis and their way of rituals, e.g. dhikr or singing and dancing as he witnessed in Baghdad. Ibn Hanbal likewise condemned the Sufi path and the practice of asceticism, zuhd, in its extreme form. The sharpest charge came later and was levelled by a Hanbali jurist called Ibn Taymiyyah, who died in 728-1327. He condemned the tariqa bata'ihiyya al-Rafa'iyya as deviations from the true Shari'iyya. His reasoning was that although they Sufis identified themselves as Muslims, their practices also led to shirk, association with God, transgression and innovation in the Shari'iyya. In Shatibi's opinion, Sufis and certain fuqaha, jurists under the influence of tasawwuf, contradicted the mainstream of mashhur al-fiqh, the Maliki fiqh that was prevalent at the time. And they did this by performing rituals which he considered to be bid'ah due to their adverse effects upon the authoritativeness of jurisprudence and usul. His critique is probably directed at the extreme performances of Sufis of an esoteric nature that seemed alien to juridical principles. According to Weiss, this seemed then a public rejection of a body of doctrine objectively arrived at. Sufis thus became their opponents rather than their colleagues. Sufis at times seemed to threaten the structure of theology and law promoted by jurists and built upon the foundations of the dalil aqli and the dalil lafzi, the rationalistic evidence and the spoken lafz, the pronounced evidence. Marshall Hodgson, however, attempted to reconcile them through an epistemological approach. He highlights the points on which Sufis observing the inward meaning and the jurists observing the outward meaning fulfill the law. Both are completely valid and necessary. He concludes, complementing rather than contradicting one another. And here I'll venture into the footnotes, which I don't normally do. But Marshall Hodgson, who was a very famous Orientalist who wrote a magisterial 3-volume work called The Venture of Islam, said in volume 2, page 219, the justification of Sufism, according to Hodgson, with respect to Shari'iyya, was not dependent upon a dialectical subtlety or upon rigoristic rules, but on a frank division of labour. So quite a Marxist sort of way of looking at it. The ulama taught the Shari'iyya, the way of daily life, and the Sufis taught the tariqah, the way of mystical life. So their relationship was a frank division of labour. Legally speaking, it is not possible to say that all Sufi practices violate the Shari'iyya. The problem lies, as Weiss notes, with extreme Sufis who ignore the Zahir al-Lafz of the Nas, the apparent statement of the text. More commonly, no Arabic given. More commonly, jurists elaborated the Shari'iyya as a way of daily life, and Sufis carried that order into effect in the tariqah. In other words, the Sufi path is presupposed by the Shari'iyya. After all, it was widely recognized that no person could attempt to become a Sufi until first confirmed in the way of the jurists. Despite Andalusians adhering in the main to the Maliki school, they were also devoted to Sufi orders, such as one led by Ibn Sab'in, who died in 669, which is commensurate with 1270, and later by his disciple Hasan al-Shustari, who died in 668, 1269. Moreover, it was reported that the development of such Sufi orders owed much to the influx of immigrants from India, Samarkand, Tabriz, and Khurasan. The flourish of Sufism was reported that people gathered in the houses of certain Sufis, especially to recite the Quran, perform dhikr, and listen to poets like the controversial Al-Hallaj. Such practices were later followed not just by Sufis but also by jurists who tried to blend their exoteric mode of fiqh with the esotericism of tasawwuf. Such customs among some Sufis and jurists were regarded by Shatibi as bid'ah ad-dalala, erroneous innovation, which had no precedent in the time of the Prophet or his companions. Generally speaking, mystical practices were performed by groups of Sufis. Shatibi believed that gatherings for the purpose of dancing and mystical singing were not only foreign to the Sunnah, but also had been censored by pious Sufis such as Hasan al-Basri. The latter condemned every religious act that deviated from the Salaf as-Salih, the pious predecessors. The Sufi movement in Andalusia was supposed to have been founded in the 10th century by groups of fakir Sufis in the region of Granada. Among others, the most remarkable Sufi leader was Sidi Abu Ishaq Ibrahim, who was considered to possess considerable barakah, blessing. Ibn al-Khatib records that some Andalusis were also devoted to the Rabita, Sufi order led by Abu Ahmed Ja'far. The order focused on the recitation of the Quran, dhikr, and poetry readings of al-Hallaj. Such practices were beyond the pale of Sharia, according to many jurists. This camp was considered extreme, for its members would engage in spiritual sessions involving ecstatic chanting. More often than not, they were almost naked, awaiting God's illumination. Al-Sharisi, who died in 914, reports in greater detail on the growth of Sufi practices and orders in Andalusia of his day. The camps or centers of these mystics varied in structure and in name, Khaniqa, Ribat, or Fakir, from one area to another. Such Sufis were severely condemned by fuqaha, who accused them of being responsible for the spread of Bida. Their gatherings where they danced, sang, and recited dhikr sometimes moved them to the point of weeping. Such practices were considered an indictment to the Sharia and categorized as bid'ah by Andalusian jurists such as Izz-ud-Din ibn Abd Salam, who died in 1260, and Abu Faris Abdulaziz ibn Muhammad al-Qayrawani. The sharp censor which deviant Sufi practice elicited was reiterated by Abu Zayd Sayyidi Abdurrahman al-Waghlisi, basing his conviction on the opinion of Imam Malik, who died in 179-795, who severely rejected the practice of clapping hands and dancing and spiritual dhikr. Al-Waghlisi argued that such activities had never been indulged in by pious Sufi predecessors in the dhikr or ibadat. However, he admitted if the practice was intended as a defense against the dangers of corruption, daf al-mafasid, and was not a form of worship, ibadah, it could be counted as a part of ada, custom, and legally be followed. Responding to these charges, Sufis argued that no evidence or proof could be found to justify barring the tariqah. They pointed out that the jurists who implicitly gave approval legitimized and attended performances reinforcing these practices. Had they deviated from the true path of the Sharia, these jurists would never have taken part in them. Al-Shatibi, however, dismissing the presence and attendance of jurists at these functions, delivers a severe critique of dhikr gatherings as forms of prohibited bid'ah. He resorted to the historical evidence of the Prophet and his companions who did not engage in such practices. Stay tuned for many more parts.